Now, for the revolution, in terms of the revolution as war, had Las Vegas existed 400 years ago, and had you went there to meet an odds maker, to ask him, or 200 years ago rather, had you gone there to meet an odds maker and ask him to lay odds on who's going to win the Revolutionary War, the colonials or the British, they either would have taken no odds or the odds would have overwhelmingly been in favor of the British, because on paper, the British had all of the advantages. They had the advantage of a well-developed industrial plant. Remember, mercantilism had contributed to that. They had a professional, fully trained military. They were well-equipped. They had excellent lines of command and control. They had the world's largest navy, so they could project their influence. They had industrial capacity. They had vast resources of the empire that they could bring to bear in this one specific spot if they need to. As for the colonials, well, what do we know about the colonials? They don't have any industrial base. They're broke. They're undersupplied. They're completely untrained in the methodologies of modern warfare for this era. It's a bunch of farmers. From the British point of view, it's a bunch of farmers with pitchforks and shotguns who are going to try to stand up to the world's most disciplined musketmen, which was the British Army. They're untrained. They're thoroughly outgunned. They either have to steal or beg or borrow in the weapons and cannons they get. So it seems like it ought to be a laugher. It ought to be a no-brainer that the British are going to win and win huge. But each of the British advantages had coming with it some connected limitations or disadvantages. And for every colonial defect or limitation, there were some curiously colonial advantages as well. And for analogic thinking or linkage, linking things together, consider the revolution to be England's Vietnam. Because in many ways, this is the struggle that confronts England in terms of what ought to be easy and isn't. This smaller force, because it's irregular, the biggest advantage they have is the war is being fought over here. It's being fought on this continent. So the colonials have, for lack of a better term, what you could call the home field advantage. They know the best places to hide when they want to organize attacks. They know the best places to do the attacking. They know the best places to stay away from, where they know the British are. They've got a large group of people in their own colonial interior they can run to for support. They're highly motivated because, as we said, lives, fortune, sacred honor. If the colonials lose, loss means the loss. If the Patriots lose, rather, means the loss of everything, not just the liberties, but they'll probably be, dancing at the end of a hangman's rope. They also have the enemy is easily identifiable. There's these large military formations, the guys in the big British uniforms. The British force is big, but it's going to be ponderous because it's big. They can kind of move quickly. And the colonials have the ability for rapid movement because they don't have this big structured military force. It's going to allow them to sort of hit and run rapidly, determine the time and nature of conflict. The British, for their part, all their advantages, some of their advantages in this kind of war get twisted into disadvantages. And they find this out for the first time when those 1,500 men leave Boston to go out to Lexington and Concord. On the way back, 300 or so of them get killed by colonials who will not fight a continental war. In other words, they won't fight by the traditional box formation, stand in tightly packed lines, and march, drop to a knee, fire, second volley fires from above, stepping and marching forward. The colonials fight in a regular war, warfare they learned from, in many ways, hard experience in the French and Indian War, when the French and their Indian allies fought that way for the first couple of years and decimated the British, when the British lost enormously. But so the Americans are highly motivated. They have excellent leadership in the form of George Washington as their military commander. And they're going to seek and get foreign aid. The British, for their part, not having this home field advantage, they're far from home. Communication is difficult. If you look up at the big map up here, what we have is that the British, for their part, have military forces deployed over here in a pre-radio, pre-telephone, pre-electronic communications model. If they're going to coordinate the activities of any of their multiple armies that range the span of this Atlantic coastline, it's tough to coordinate those and have a master plan when you can't have immediate communication. And in terms of communicating with their direct superiors, it's like 4 to 6 weeks to get information back saying we're requesting orders to solve this problem. Providing Parliament or the King read it right away, it's going to take them a couple days to decide what to do, and then another 4 to 6 weeks to get back. So you're talking about a 3-month turnaround in terms of the British making top-down command and control decisions. This is going to make it fantastically difficult for them to manage and prosecute this war on a coordinated, multi-pronged, multi-front strategy. Additionally, note the country. Notice how big that is compared to how big this is. This war is going to be prosecuted over the vastness of a continent. And remember the proclamation of 1763? That's the area that's to the green of this line. All this was supposed to be forbidden from settlement for the colonials. The British couldn't really do a good job of keeping the colonials from disobeying that law when the colonials still considered themselves to be English subjects. How well are the British going to be able to manage and contain this bunch of colonials now that at least 2/5 of the colonial population is actively trying to resist their authority, make war against them, and kill them? The British had a hard time, as I said, keeping this all unified and doing what the king wanted back when they thought they were loyal subjects. Now a lot think they're not. It's going to be vastly more difficult. And for the British, they suffer the same problem we suffered in Vietnam, the same difficulties that you see in Iraq and Afghanistan for the American conventional forces. It's really tough, for lack of a better term, to tell the good guys from the bad guys. Because the irregular forces, it's difficult to tell friend from foe, who's on your side and who isn't. For the colonials, it's quite easy to tell who the bad guys are. It's that big massive army with all the red coats on. And massive is that other thing. The British are going to deploy a massive force. Coming in conventionally, the British are going to come in big and heavy. They're going to come in with large troop deployments, artillery, baggage wagons, baggage trains, etc. So the British are going to be like this giant elephant in the room with, a hummingbird. And if the elephant can ever corner the hummingbird, it can stomp on it, right? It's over rather quickly. The hummingbird, that light, small little animal, the colonial forces, quick, small, irregular, are going to be so difficult for the British to grab, the British are going to feel like they're grasping at air. Every time they try to go and get them and fight this conventional war, the colonials want no part of it. The colonials won't fight by their tactics and their rules, and it's going to make it a tremendously difficult challenge for the British to undertake. So all of these issues that seem to make it seem so obvious and simple that the British were going to win this and win it in about 10 days to 2 months aren't really so simple once you actually engage in the practical realities of what's going to happen here in the New World. In terms of social conflict, this war does represent a significant division within the population throughout the entire time, which may help explain why it wound up being a 9-year conflict. You've got 2/5 of the population who are pro-revolution, who are the patriots who want to break away. You've got 1/5 of the population that probably that was the loyalist 1/5 who wanted to remain with England, and then you've got another 2/5 of the population that just don't want to be bothered, just don't care and say, leave me alone. So it's really not everybody against the British, it's 2/5 of the people here against the British, and 1/5 of the people here actually actively helping the British, the so-called loyalists or Tories, which is going to make for 2 separate conflicts. There's the British versus colonial conflict, and then a very messy civil war, a fratricidal, internal colonial versus colonial conflict between the loyalist colonials or Tories and the patriot colonials as they sort of settle their own scores. Particularly in the South, this is going to turn very bloody and very messy. And so the Native Americans, for their part, want to play the same role they played during the French and Indian War. They're going to side with whoever can benefit them the best. As they see it, siding with the British was better for them because, after all, the British were reserving for them this entire interior space right here. The British had said in the Proclamation Treaty of 1763 line that all this will be for the Native Americans, where the American colonials, if they win, they make no promises whatsoever. They're going to kind of expand across the continent. So from the Native American point of view, it makes far more sense for them to ally themselves with the British and preserve the status quo rather than throw in with the American patriots and try to overthrow this whole British model. So when it comes to strategy and tactics, both sides were looking to employ what they saw as being their advantages to maximal effect. And from the British point of view, what have we said? The British conventional forces, vast resources of the empire, population outnumbers the colonies at this point still. They want to come in big and heavy. So the British process could be seen in many ways their strategy of being divide and conquer. By divide and conquer, I mean the British see in many ways New England is being the cancer of rebellion. The Boston Tea Party is up there. The Boston Massacre is up there. The greatest agitation against the stamp tax and the tea acts were all going on up here. The British want to maybe slice this cancer away initially, divide and conquer. They want to control the major cities and dominate America from the outside in. That's in many ways their strategy, crush the Continental Army. The colonials, for their part, They don't want to do any of that. The last thing the colonials want to do is get into conventional stand and fight, toe-to-toe slugfest with the British. If they do, the colonials will be ground to dust, and they know it. They want to fight hit-and-run engagements, what are known as guerrilla tactics. They want to avoid major confrontations, and whenever they can, they want to try to draw the British, draw them away from the seacoast, away from their supplies, away from their command and control, into the interior. The more the colonials can bring this conflict into the interior of America, the more they can extend the British lines of supply, the lines of command and control. They can isolate them, cut them off, and make it a war the colonials can win. Above all, the colonials want to control the countryside and control the time, choosing time, the place, and combat. They want to hit them where they ain't and dictate the nature of how this war unfolds. They want to be the ones that do the striking, and by the time the British come in and react to their big heavy force, they want to be gone. That's sort of the principle behind their actions, which is basic hit-and-run tactics of a guerrilla campaign. It's the way an irregular small force, it's the only way an irregular small force has any chance to survive against a larger, more conventional, more well-equipped force. So with these tactics and strategies in mind, our next lesson will take us to how these strategies and tactics actually, the relative successes and failures of both sides in applying their advantages to try to prosecute this war to the best of their ability.